What's up? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Shred Show Live. I love it when I start my intro because whoever I have as a guest, they're always smiling because they know we're about to shred, and I'm so excited. I've had him on the show before, but Brian Zitin, CEO and co-founder of Reggora, is joining me. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Forbes Under 30 recipient. This guy is absolutely insane, and he's going to be sharing. We're talking about the appraisal puzzle today. You are not going to want to miss it. Plus, we're so excited to be fielding your questions. If you have questions about appraisals, if you want to know what the future is, if you want to know how to help your consumers, you are not going to want to miss this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, volume up, share it, tag your friends because we are about to shred. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to have Brian Zitin with me this morning. Brian, good morning and welcome back to the Shred Show.
Thank you for having me. That intro is, it's like a shot of espresso. You can't help but smile when you hear that.
Dude, exactly. We don't need no coffee this morning. We're on the show. We're talking about so many exciting things. And Brian, I'm excited to have you just because being in the industry as long as I have seen so many things when it comes to the appraisal space. But you at Reggora, what you guys are doing is truly innovative. It's pioneering the industry. It's taking us from where we've been to where we're going in such a fast-paced manner. And we're going to be talking about so many things. But before we get into so many of that, like I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions about the appraisal space, all of you mortgage professionals, real estate professionals, if you have questions, Brian is here to answer those as well. So we're going to field some of those questions. So feel free to drop those questions below as we are chatting, and we'll field those as they come in. But Brian, before we get into all this fun information and this really valuable information to everybody in the industry, kind of give us a background on yourself, because again, you haven't been in the mortgage industry, in the mortgage space for very long.
No, and I tell the same joke every time when I talk about how I got into it. Woke up as a young boy, like everyone else, wanting to automate the appraisal industry, follow the dream. Probably like most, I honestly just fell into the mortgage business. I was roommates in college. I went to Boston University with my buddy who's like, a tech whiz from middle of nowhere, Connecticut. Beginning of senior year, we started our own real estate brokerage that basically used algorithms to get the property information of, every single property owner in Massachusetts. So we sold like $5 million worth of properties throughout senior year doing that. Got exposure to the overall, real estate process, and obviously the mortgage is part of that. In walks the appraiser with their clipboard, really low tech, really manual. So when we graduated, we took the money that we made doing brokerage and started building out tools to streamline the appraisal process. So that was 2017 when I graduated. So 4 years later, now we have raised about $45 million in venture capital, same folks behind Twitter and Slack, companies like that.
Dang.
And, hopefully on the path to appraisal world domination.
Appraisal world domination. Yeah, you're like, you know what? I'm going to change the world. That's what you, as a little kid, I could just see you sitting there saying, Mom, one day I'm going to change the appraisal world. I'm going to change everything about it. It's going to be amazing. And here you are doing that today. So I'm sure most of us as children had that exact same dream. Who cares about space? Who cares about being a fireman? We just want to change the world of appraisals. So, but all joking aside, I mean, Reggora really is, you guys continue to innovate and you do these very cool things. And we're going to talk about how, the kind of the old way of doing appraisals is starting to, we're starting to get updates, which is really, really cool. But before we get into there, for those who don't even know Reggora and they're like, Reggora, maybe they've heard of it and, in conversations, but really what is Reggora?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, to your point, like we're a back end thing. So, we're probably not the loudest name out there, but basically what we are is like the software that basically thinking about the plumbing of the appraisal process. So we are the thing that facilitates the, order, the payment, the placement to the appraiser, the status updates, the delivery of the report, everything that's happening in terms of the actual logistics of the appraisal, our software facilitates. So we're not like the AMC or the individual appraiser, but we are like the software railroad that all of that is kind of flowing through. So in that we, hopefully streamline and automate as much as we can.
Well, and that's just it, is the appraisal process in particular. That's why we call this solving the appraisal puzzle, because there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of people blame the appraisers. But I think appraisers probably get beat up just as much, or if not more, than LOs right now. Because we as originators, I mean, being in the mortgage industry as long as I have, owning a mortgage company, helping so many of my clients go through this process, so many times have I thrown an appraiser under the bus. Oh, we're waiting on the AMC. We're waiting on the appraiser. It's the appraiser's fault. He's taking too long, which those days are probably, coming shorter to an end, just because there's such a supply and a demand challenge right now. The total number of appraisers is actually declining, right, Brian?
Yeah, and to your point, like the turn times are actually getting worse. So, and it's to your point, mostly a supply and demand problem. If you think about like what is appraisal, you basically need to send a physical human to a physical location at the right place at the right time to do this appraisal. There's one logistics problem. And if you think about like any kind of logistics marketplace, like an Uber, the less number of drivers there are, the longer your wait times and the slower it's going to be, right? So same thing happening with appraisers. The average age of the appraiser is over 60 years old. They're declining by 5% every year, mostly because, to your point, it's a really tough business to be in. You're very regulated. It's basically like you can't do anything right. You can only do things wrong as an appraiser. And it's tough to get into. You have to be a trainee and all this stuff. So the number of appraisers is, to your point, been declining for the last 5 years.
So, and the average age is also increasing, right? That's another big problem. There's actually in our building here, I've got a guy who's been doing appraisals for over 35 years. This guy Joe is absolutely, like, it's been fun even hearing some of his stories, and we're going to do a show with him one of these days, hearing about his experience from when appraisals started. He shared that they used to literally measure out the houses. He remembers taking these big tape measures and like measuring out rooms and all this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. But the average age is increasing. Demand continues to increase. What are the ways that we're seeing that? Hopefully, like, is there a new generation of appraisers? Are they like you? Is there a bunch of guys just in college that are like, you know what? I want to go be an appraiser. That's the life for me. We don't really see that, right, Brian?
I would like to say yes. And there are, tons of different programs of people trying to get new appraisers in the industry, but frankly, like, they're really just not working that much. Like, no one is graduating college really and wanting to go become an appraiser. There definitely are some new people joining, but the rate at which people are leaving is still much higher than the rate at which people are entering. So, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit later. The FHFA and various people are opening up alternative solutions to try to fix that supply gap. But with the appraiser, it's not been super successful thus far.
Well, and again, we would love to see this new world of this young generation of appraisers just excited to come in. They're like, yes. But also one of the things, and I shared this with you, one of my really good friends was an NFL player, like absolutely, like NFL, comes from a great career, gets injured, and is kind of looking for a new opportunity. His brother-in-law is an appraiser, and he's like, oh, come be an appraiser. And he was sharing his experience of becoming an appraiser, and the barrier of entry, it's difficult. Like, you have to go through an apprenticeship. There's so many amount of hours. So even if we were to really excite a younger generation of becoming appraisers, the process, that barrier of entry is fairly difficult, correct?
Yeah. And like I said, they've tried to do, new programs where you can like do things virtually. You don't need that, mentor sort of thing. But once again, it really hasn't taken off that much, despite people's best efforts. So I think people are looking at alternative options.
Nice. So with all this being said too, and with this supply and demand, what aspects of the appraisal really are slowing the process? What's causing the most delays in the process right now?
It really is. And this is, in my opinion, it really is like that kind of inefficiency of the logistics. So, so you already have a reduced number of drivers, right, in the form of appraisers. Now, stack on top of that the ridiculous fragmentation in the industry. So most appraisers are like individual sole proprietors. So you have tens of thousands of them, and then you have hundreds of different AMCs who are also acting in the middle of that. Sure. So unlike Uber, where it knows that this driver is in this neighborhood and can pick you up, if I'm lender trying to order an appraisal in a particular neighborhood, there might be an appraiser already going there 3 days from now, but I have no idea that appraiser is going to be there. So I have to go find my own appraiser. And so basically, like, all the logistics are screwed up. So to go find the right appraiser that can actually meet the deadline is basically like a best guess shot in the dark. You call appraisers and you're like, can you do this at this time? They're like, no. You're like, all right, I'm going to call the next one. And hopefully you find someone. So it's not super efficient in that way right now.
I say the process just doesn't sound like it's the most efficient thing in the world, which is unfortunate. But, and again, that's what again, changing the world of appraisal, that's your goal. And that's hopefully as you see this evolve. But you mentioned lenders. How do you see current market pricing really affecting that as well? How does that affect lenders in particular?
Well, so the interesting thing about the crazy market that we're in right now, offers are going up, 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 right? So
Big
prices
time.
are getting pushed up, and the appraisal is kind of like a lagging indicator of that because they have to use past history of comparables to get to a value. So what you're seeing more recently is that appraised values are coming in under the actual asking price way more frequently than they were before.
Right.
So it's affecting the amount of like mortgage, loan amount that a person can actually get. They're having to break the difference in terms of, that difference. And then so cash buyers now are doing even better, right? Because, you don't even need the appraisal in the first place. So it's just, another one of those things that's making the appraisal a more difficult part of the overall mortgage process.
So, and that's a question we're going to come back to because I got that question as we're sitting here will technology solve that problem of going back to your question? Will technology begin to help solve some of these issues? We're going to talk about technology here. We're going to get more into that here in just a second.
Yep.
But so stick around for that question. That was a really good question. But what approaches are really giving lenders? What are they seeing? What approaches are they taking? What measurements are being put in place that lenders are seeing the most success with right now?
Yeah. So when it comes to the appraisal, it's really two things. It's like, your internal process, which is all the software that we facilitate. So like, how many clicks is it taking you to actually order it? Are you getting it to the right vendor in the right area at the right time? Like, how frictionless is it for the consumer to pay? So we're helping, handle that stuff. And so, traditionally that's a very legacy industry in terms of like, appraisal software is like the least sexy thing you can think of. There's not many 27-year-olds like working on appraisal software. So, lenders who are kind of upgrading that technology have an easier time, just, point blank. Number two is like working with the right vendors. So we see a lot more lenders shifting from that AMC middleman approach to working a direct panel of appraisers. Going back to the initial supply thing, what we didn't talk about, because the supply of appraisers is lower and the demand is higher, the appraisal fees have gone up because they can basically, demand a higher fee. And so if you have that, interim person in place, it makes it even more difficult to get the right fee for a vendor. So we're actually seeing a lot of lenders shift from appraisal management companies to direct to appraisers. That being said, the AMC is very helpful in terms of actually fulfilling it, the appraisal and finding that right appraiser at the right time. So, people are balancing, okay, I'm going to manage a panel where I know these appraisers really well, and areas where I don't know them as well, I'm going to use AMCs to kind of bridge the gap. So those are some of that kind of hybrid approach that we're starting to see a lot of.
I like that hybrid approach. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. And actually kind of leading into it is that technology piece that was asked. There's challenges with legacy technology within our industry. There's a lot of people who argue, and we're not going to mention any companies in particular, but they haven't really changed the process. They continue to build on top of this legacy technology. It still has the bare bones and this foundation of like, it was, it started as one thing and they just keep building on top. Is it now, are we at the point where new technology needs to come in and kind of shift, not reinvent the wheel by any means, but say, okay, this old way of doing things, it's not as efficient as you're talking about right now. The technology does need to improve. We do need to be making these changes. So is the future of technology and with what Reggora working on the software, is it going to be what companies need to start adapting with?
I mean, I think so, because if you just look at like the kind of history of the last 10 years in terms of like mortgage tech, first, obviously the main thing was like the loan origination system. So there's massive companies that are big loan origination systems, and then point of sale systems became a thing. Now, making the application online, and now what we're seeing is a lot of the more technology around like the supplementary backend services like appraisal, title, closing, all the different things that are actually parts of that factory line. So I think now is the time where a lot of those changes are happening. Now that kind of the rest of the mortgage is caught up. And so, whether it's, in the actual integrations with those systems, the actual workflows, or kind of the overall process, yeah, I mean, technology right now is definitely the main focus for a lot of these lenders trying to improve things.
See, and I think this is a cool Mark. I don't know how to say your last name, Mark. Mark Scapinets. He's an appraiser. Has a cool comment. Has a huge comment here. I'm going to share the rest of them. But he says there is only a shortage of appraisers that are willing to work for the AMC model that are cheap and fast as fees. Many AMCs created more issues. What are your thoughts? Are AMCs creating more issues? Is that something to be thinking about as well?
I think that the AMCs, were was something that kind of necessarily sprung out of the housing crisis and this big kind of compliance burden. To Mark's point, and as I alluded to, through the introduction of an intermediary, naturally they're going to take their cut, which increases the fees, right?
Sure.
And so, if the lender is unwilling to meet those higher fees, so like if let's say the appraiser was starting out at $500, and now the AMC is in there, they're going to take some portion of that. Now the lender needs to either increase their fee, so the appraiser can net the same, but the borrower is paying more, or if they don't increase the fee, well, now the AMC is going to take a chunk of that, and the appraiser is going to make less. So naturally, kind of in any supply and demand marketplace, to Mark's point, like if there's a certain price that appraisers are willing to do jobs at, so if that fee for you is lower, then you're obviously going to have a lower pool of appraisers, to get access to, essentially. That's just the nature of like any market. So that's why I'm saying I think we're seeing a shift, especially in this like really high demand environment, from lenders to go to a more direct to panel approach in that regard, partially because of exactly what Mark is talking about.
Mark, great question and comments that we really appreciate that. And guys, continue to drop your questions. Brian and I are going to get to a few more of those, but I want to go back to this technology and integrations. Something we talk a lot about within the fintech space, within our industry right now, are these integrations, these companies that are working together to simplify the process. You mentioned POS, different LOS software that are coming out. Is that something we're going to see more and more of? And is that something that's going to help? I mean, the originator, the real estate agent, make this more efficient process for the borrower? Is these integrations?
100%. And I'll give you a couple of examples. And it is improving mostly because of, like, I'd say the improvements to APIs. So the ability for different technology providers to integrate together in like a seamless way. Before, let's say you were going to order an appraisal, you have to probably jump to different screens, go to different places, things get lost in the fray. The loan officer doesn't know what's going on because it's not in like their native software. And so just the overall, operational difficulties in doing that were high. Now through deeper integrations, you can like a lot of our lenders don't even physically push an order button. It just automatically triggers once certain milestones are met in the loan, and it's kind of all automated. On the point of sale side, you can envision like consumers who are getting refinances. Before kind of integration efforts, they're doing their online application in one of these point of sale systems. They, then get like a separate email to pay for the appraisal or something, or they have to like, articulate their credit card information over the phone to a loan officer. So it completely breaks that process. So now we can put that into those systems. Or the appraiser needs to call the borrower separately to schedule the inspection. Say, hey, when can I come? Now, if you can plug into those systems, you can give the calendar availability of the various parties and kind of automate that process, right? So there are different parts that are, because of the ability to plug into these different systems, getting more and more streamlined.
Yeah, and that's what we want to see, that those integrations, these collaborations between companies. I think that's where we will see it become more and more efficient, is these types of conversations. And it's great people like Mark. It's people who are actually putting it, like appraisers, originators, who are actually bringing ideas to the table and helping with that conversation as well. And you mentioned this is flexibility. Every lender has unique workflow. They have a unique need. So how are these integrations creating more flexibility? How is that helping, really further things along as well?
Well, from a flexibility standpoint, it's not necessarily as much about the integrations as much as like the actual workflow software. And so we're talking in like the theory, like, right, it'd be great to automate every single aspect of this process. But in reality, you have mortgage lenders where, okay, this branch of loan officers wants to collect the fee upfront because they want to get that borrower buy-in. And if you as the borrower aren't willing to pay that appraisal, then whatever, come back to me when you are. Then on the other hand, you have some branches who don't want the borrower to pay that fee. They want to make as frictionless of an experience. They're willing to take the risk that the borrower will, bounce out of the loan. And so they want to do collect at close. And so, there are different, and that's just one workflow. You can imagine, 7 different aspects of the appraisal where,
right.
So if you as a system, as a workflow system, don't have the configurability and flexibility to do that sort of thing, then, lenders are just gonna be hard pressed to actually adopt new technology because they don't want to piss off their loan officers. So you need to be able to accommodate all those different personalities while also kind of dragging them along to the future.
Well, this is a really interesting question that comes in about pissing off loan officers. Will there ever come a time where originators can select their own appraisers, like working with the lenders. We all know that as originators, whether they're broker, banker, working with that through the origination process, we're in the relationship business. This is a really cool question because I know in the past and back, when I first started doing loans, I gained relationships with appraisers, and now it's kind of a no-no to reach out directly to appraisers. But will there come a time where originators can, like you said, talking about these boards, selecting panels of originators where they're like, hey, I know that Brian is in Salt Lake City, Utah. He knows this well. I've work with him. Will there come a time where originators can select their own appraisers?
I don't think so. But I mean, there's a silver lining, right? So
sure.
The main reason why AMCs came into existence was to prevent that very interaction from happening, because although we would hope that most people aren't being nefarious in terms of like picking that appraiser or selecting them, it did lead to some issues during the housing crisis where people were saying, Joe appraiser, please, I need this to come in at $1 million, that sort of thing.
Right.
But if you think about like, what is the motive behind that? The loan officer, once again, just wants the most frictionless, smooth appraisal from the most knowledgeable person in that area that they can find. And if you think about what like an Uber style platform does, something that we want to, and technology like ours are helping with, is using big data, machine learning and things like that to find the right appraiser for the right job at the right time. So, 10 years ago, there wasn't technology that was able to do that. Now there is. And so, loan officers don't really need to do that if the technology can help them do it themselves, So I think that'll be kind of the middle ground. They're still not going to be able to do it directly, but there's going to be technology like mine to help pick the right one for you in a much more streamlined way.
Which again, that's exactly what we're talking about. So we don't even have, as originators, we don't have to worry about that going and picking it. Your software, that helps us with the process, finding the most efficient appraisers, finding the system, relying on a system. That's what technology is all about, is helping us become more and more efficient with our time. The last thing I want to go do is like take time out of my busy day to go handpick appraisers and actually find out who's the best one, who's this. So when you have a process and you have the tools in place, and here's another really interesting, and I've heard this multiple times as we've led up to this, is will appraisers ever be replaced? I mean, is that something that's ever going to happen?
I mean, this is a perfect segue into the
exactly, literally is, right?
So for those, just to give a bit of background on this. So as we've been talking about, there's this big supply problem in terms, relevant to the number of loans. New appraisers aren't joining the industry. So the FHFA, who still ultimately wants to help provide liquidity to the overall market and make sure that the appraisal isn't causing problems for consumers, have put out this RFI, or this request for information to the public and the industry, saying, hey, look, we want to modernize our appraisal process. Please give us your feedback in terms of how we can do that.
Right.
So right now it's very binary. It's either an appraisal waiver or a full appraisal. And so on like really easy, kind of simple, good loan to value loans, refis, like there's been a lot of appraisal waivers, or you're doing the full appraisal.
Right.
What the concept that the FHFA and the GSEs have introduced through this, that once again is not passed or official yet, but it seems like it could be, I mean, honestly, very soon, is the introduction of this like intermediary product, and people call it by different names, hybrid appraisals, different things like that. But essentially, it's like taking a risk-based approach to valuation. So just like you're going to underwrite a mortgage based off someone's credit score and a bunch of different factors to see how risky that loan is. Why not take the same approach with appraisals, where why are we using the same level of expertise for a Texas ranch with 20 other identical Texas ranches next to it that have all sold recently versus the rural property that's a complex one in Maine? And so I'm saying, based off the actual risk characteristics of the property, the consumer, the loan itself, can we use a lower expertise individual to go at least gather the data and then send that back to either an appraiser or a computer to do the reconciliation process? So this is by no means going to replace appraisers, because there's still going to be that big chunk of loans that still requires that surgeon, human touch. But there could be some chunk of loans that, based off of the risk profile and the criteria, like the GSEs are comfortable using an alternative workforce. And so what that translates into in terms of like, turn times and things like that, there's about 40,000 active appraisers right now. You can imagine if that gets opened up to the 2 million real estate agents who can now do inspections, the supply just blew up. And so now the Uber drivers out there are, there's way more. And so the turn times can get better. And then, hopefully as long as they maintain high enough quality standards, the overall risk profile of these loans doesn't change at all, but we get a way faster appraisal on at least some portion of these loans. So I think that's the overall thought process. And,
sure.
Could be something that happens, later this year even or next.
I was going to say, is this something in our future? And what's Reggora's take on this? Is this something that, like you said, going to the Uber effect, is this something that could be good for the appraisal industry?
Well, so yeah, I mean, they put this RFI out. It closed in February or March. So I don't know how fast governments move on things like this. But, you could envision 8 months later, they make their decision based off of that data. Right. And now it's official. So who knows? It could happen next month. It could happen 6 months from now, or it could be another 3 years. Like who knows? But I do think it's going to eventually happen because the problem isn't going away, like we said. Our take on it is, it's tough to have like a perfect answer because only Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have all the data, right?
Correct.
But if they can demonstrate, like statistically, that using this alternative workforce on some small percentage of loans results in the equal level or like an acceptable level of risk from like a foreclosure standpoint and all that sort of stuff, so you can maintain the same risk profile, then why not introduce this in some regard while using the appraisers as that trusted expert on the tougher properties and things like that. So because honestly, we would like to see that. Like there's like a ton of appraisal waivers right now, like 30-40%, and appraisers don't even realize that, but that ultimately is way riskier than someone else doing an inspection because no one's even looking at the property basically.
True.
So we would like, at least property validation to supersede a good chunk of those appraisal waivers. So I think it'll be a win-win for everyone. I know appraisers are very nervous about their jobs getting taken away. Ultimately, they're going to be able to focus on the stuff that they're actually really good at, which is like the expert reconciliation and not necessarily be like the data gatherers on some percentage of loans at least. So yeah, I mean, we're excited about it and we think it'd be good for kind of everyone.
So what should lenders and appraisers be preparing for when it comes, I mean, FHFA RFI, like you said, they could be next month. It could be months down the road. Should lenders be preparing for this? Should appraisers be preparing for this? What should they be preparing for?
Yeah, from the lender standpoint, you want to be agile, right? Because if this goes down, I mean, it's going to be crazy. Like it's going to be like when e-notarization and all that stuff, and everyone was scrambling to get on that during COVID, right? Because you're just not going to be competitive if your appraisals are taking 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and the lender next door is taking 2-4 days. Right. So for the lenders, that's why we're saying like appraisal is something you should be focusing on right now. You want like an agile technology partner and at least be thinking about what the implications of all of this are, so that if it does happen, you can jump on it and be prepared. For the appraiser, I think it's definitely about making sure that you are getting familiar with these new technologies, so that if it does happen, you're going to be the go-to, on a lot of this stuff. So getting familiarity with desktop appraisals, using technology to make you the trusted expert when it comes to complex properties and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that people should be at least aware and preparing in some regard.
And I totally agree with that. And I got another comment here from Mark. Sorry, it like takes up the screen. Mark, you've got great comments here. There will need to be laws in place. And right now, with the hybrids, the appraiser is the only person responsible when they assign the report. And that's kind of what this whole FHFA RFI, that's why it's not going to be going to place tomorrow, Brian, is because they need to analyze all the data. They need to make sure that the right laws and the right guidelines are put into place. And to Mark's point here, that's something that everything is being taken into consideration. That they're not just going to rush into something because, again, and this is actually a comment too. They say, please don't share my name or this comment, but please ask it. Will our appraisers going to be liable for something that happened in 2008, 2009? Are they ones responsible for inflation right now? That's the question that's being asked here. This other one that
appraisers are definitely not the ones responsible for inflation. Appraisers are simply reporting the market data. So, the appraisers are not responsible. Obviously, the money printing and everything else, the crazy going on in the math is responsible for the actual inflation. Appraisers are simply reporting on that. They're definitely not responsible for the inflation. In terms of that first question, I mean, it's not completely true. When the FHFA put out COVID flexibilities for appraisals, the appraiser was limited to trusting the data that they got. So, you're not liable if the data was misrepresented and you're just going off what the data says. You're not going to be liable for that. So I totally agree with Mark in that whatever version that they're going to put out, certainly and there's like different technical terms in terms of like the actual appraisal jargon, in terms of like extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, things like that. The appraiser, I believe, is basically going to be treated like, look, you're going to get data, assume this data is valid. If not, then the person giving the data is going to be the one in trouble, not you. So, I mean, because if you're not physically there, you can't, validate it. So there definitely is going to need to be some accountability mechanism for the person doing the data gathering, and the appraiser is simply accountable for, what they do with that data once they get it.
That is, as we start to wrap this up, that's kind of a great place to kind of start ending on. As we've all talked about, this entire show is right now with what Reggora is truly working on, what you guys are trying to achieve is not only making it more efficient, but making it more accurate. There's a lot of little holes within the industry right now. And again, we're trying to improve. COVID taught us so much things we're trying to get implemented quickly. Like you said, some of the restrictions that were put in on the appraisal space. And so many people are just complaining about, well, turn times. They take so long. But there's so much more to the appraisal and what's going on in the appraisal than just turn times and what's going on behind the scenes. And that's why I was so excited to have you on, Brian. And we're going to be having future discussions about this. But you guys truly are, like you said, you're changing the world of appraisers. That is now your mantra, your goal. You want to shape it, and you want to make it more efficient for us as originators, for the appraiser. I'm Mark. Again, huge shout out to everybody who's commented and who has shared different insights and things. We really appreciate it. But that's just it, Brian, is Reggora is truly working to innovate the appraiser space, right?
100%. Yeah. If you think of appraisal innovation, you should think of Reggora.
Boom. Mic drop. Appraisal innovation. Reggora is the first name that you think about. Brian, I want to thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me today, for sharing so much about, and again, ladies and gentlemen, this was such a valuable conversation, and you can expect more of this with Reggora and with Brian, because again, the appraisal space is changing. And when it comes to innovation, you should think of Reggora. It's the first company you should start reaching out to. And if you want more information, Brian, they can go to reggora.com and they can reach out to you guys for more questions, correct?
Yep. Perfect.
Go there. And like I said, you can find out way more information, and you can expect Brian on the show again here very soon, talking about some of the things that you guys should expect. So huge shout out to Brian Zitin and Reggora for joining us today. Huge shout out to all of you guys. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the likes. And again, if you found this valuable, comment #shred, because that means you guys got something out of this. And if you're joining us on the replay, comment #hustle, because that means you're out there, you're getting it done. Then you're coming back here to get what you need to be successful in your business. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you. We love you. Now it's time for all of you to shred. Go show up. Hustle, repeat every day. See ya. Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you again so much for joining us for today's show. If you like the content, make sure you hit that like button below. And if you already haven't subscribed to our channel, click right over here and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to see our latest video, click over here. And again, if you want to see the best of daily content within the mortgage and real estate industries, you have to subscribe now. We look forward to having you shred with us every single day.